Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the George W. Norris Legislative Chamber for the 51st day of the 108th Legislature second session. Our chaplain today is Bill Ferrero, Church of Christ, Bayard, Nebraska, and Senator Erdman's district. Please rise.
Let's pray. Father God in heaven, we approach your throne, the throne of grace, with gratitude during this holy week when we can enter in and find the grace that we need at the foot of the cross. And Father, in this great chamber, I'm reminded of your plan of representative government. Ever since the time of Moses, when Jethro came to him, told him the work was too hard for one man, and to appoint people who would oversee thousands and hundreds and 50s and 10s in order that the workload might be lightened. But they needed to be godly men who would stand before you with integrity. And that plan is carried out throughout the centuries, where you have required the same thing within your church, godly men and women to step up into roles of servanthood that would set the example for all those around them. And Father, it's my prayer that these people that have been sent forth by the citizens of this great state would have a servant's heart, not to come into this chamber to be lords and ladies, but to come in willing to serve, just as your son served when he took the towel in the basin. And to realize that they are serving multitudes, not just themselves. And so, Father, when we come before your throne this morning, we ask for servant hearts, servant attitudes, and a servant smile, knowing that in this thankless job, we will one day stand before your throne and we will hear the only gratitude that we want to hear, and that's from your lips. And now to him who's able to strengthen you according to my gospel and the preaching of Jesus Christ, according to the revelation of the mystery that was kept secret for long ages, but has now been disclosed and through the prophetic writings has been made known to all nations, according to the command of the eternal God, to bring about the obedience of faith to the only wise God, be glory forevermore through Jesus Christ. Amen.
The Pledge of Allegiance today is from led by Corporal Dustin Gussman, Marine Corps, Omaha, Nebraska, and Senator McDonald's district.
Please join me in saying the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. I call to order the 51st day of the 108th Legislature, second session. Senators, please record your presence. Roll call. Mr. Clerk, please record.
There is a quorum present, Mr. President.
Thank you. Are there any corrections for the journal?
I have no corrections for the journal.
Are there any messages, reports, or announcements?
The Health and Human Services Committee will hold an executive session at 10:30 a.m. in room 2022. The Health and Human Services Committee in room 2022 at 10:30 a.m. Government Committee will hold an executive session at 11 a.m. in room 2022. Government Committee in room 2022 at 11 a.m. That's all that I have, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Senator Erdman would like to introduce a guest under the south balcony, his wife, Kathy Erdman. Please stand and be recognized by your Nebraska Legislature. Senator McDonald would like to recognize a guest seated under the south balcony, Eric Martin, representing the American Legion. Please stand and be recognized. Senator Lowe would like to recognize the physician of the day, Dr. John Jacobson of Kearney. Please stand and be recognized by the Nebraska Legislature. Please proceed to the first item on the agenda, Mr. Clerk.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. General file, LB 71A, introduced by Senator Sanders, a bill for an act relating to appropriations to appropriate funds to aid in carrying out the provisions of Legislative Bill 71. The bill was first considered on March 26th. It was placed on general file. I have no amendments, Mr. President.
Senator Sanders, you're recognized to open.
Good morning, Mr. President. Good morning, members of the legislature. LB 71A bill is the appropriations bill that came with Senator Conrad's 2589 amendment. The general fund is not impacted by this bill. It is from the cash funds for automation. Thank you, and I ask for your green vote to move this bill forward.
Thank you, Senator Sanders. Seeing no one else in the queue, you're recognized to close. Senator Sanders, you're recognized to close and waive closing. Members, the question is the advancement of LB 71A to E and R initial. All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
Thirty-four ayes, no nays on the advancement of the bill, Mr. President.
It is advanced. Senator McDonald would like to recognize two guests under the south balcony, Trevor Towie and Chris Wicker, both of Omaha. Please stand and be recognized by your Nebraska Legislature. Mr. Clerk, next item on the agenda.
Legislative Bill 1344A, introduced by Senator Wayne. It's a bill for an act relating to appropriations to appropriate funds to aid in carrying out the provisions of Legislative Bill 1344. The bill was first considered on March 26th. It was placed on general file. I have no amendments, Mr. President.
Senator Wayne, you're recognized to open.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, everyone. Let's have a productive day. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Wayne. You're recognized to close and waive. Members, the question is the advancement of LB 1344A to E&R initial. All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
Thirty-one ayes, no nays on the advancement of the bill, Mr. President.
LB 1344A is advanced to E&R initial. Mr. Clerk.
Mr. President, General File LB 1092. When the legislature last discussed the Legislative Bill 1092, the judiciary commitment was under consideration. A motion to bracket the bill had failed. There's now a motion from Senator Michaela Cavanaugh to reconsider the vote to bracket the bill until April 11th, 2024.
Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you're recognized to open on your motion to reconsider.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. This is such a fascinating bill, and I was really interested in the conversation last night, and I appreciate Senator Merman. I believe that there are some amendments that he would like to get to. So I think that for now, I will pull my motion to reconsider and not put up any of my other motions so that we can get to the amendments. So does that make, okay, Carol says yes. So Senator Merman, I'm going to pull my motion now so we can get to your amendments. Thank you, Mr. President.
Without objection, the motion to reconsider is withdrawn. Mr. Clerk.
Mr. President, Senator Merman would move to amend the committee amendments with AM 3198.
Senator Merman, you're recognized to open on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Lieutenant Governor. The amendment AM 3198 was brought to us after a couple of different interests reached out in concern that this bill could affect them. This amendment clarifies that only websites in which at least 1/3 of the content of the website has material harmful to minors need to conduct age verification. The amendment clarifies LB 1092 is not applying to any sort of traditional retailers. It is only applying to bookstores, libraries, movie and television services, or it is not applying to bookstores, libraries, movie and television services, or even social media. With this amendment, we are just making it clear that there is one industry and only one industry that is being affected here, and that is the pornography industry. It's a simple amendment, and the language mirrors the language where similar laws have been passed in at least 7 other states. Thank you, and I will yield my remaining time.
Thank you, Senator Merman. Senator John Kavanaugh, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, colleagues, we're back on 1092, and we had a very interesting conversation last night. Senator Blood raised a lot of good points. I appreciate Senator Merman's, good faith efforts to try to actually improve this bill, which I would say this amendment does. It answers some of the concerns. It does clarify that what a substantial portion means is 1/3. I'm curious about how we settle on 1/3. I did when Senator Merman brought up the Kansas, I think it just passed this bill. I went and looked at theirs. Theirs was also 1/3. So that seems to be a standard. I don't know why we decided on that amount, but the reason that's important to have some kind of threshold is under as it was written before, with just having basically any amount, it could potentially affect some of these other folks who are just not in this business. But if they say Amazon, if somebody was searching something, or you could search something that yields, some kind of item that you're purchasing that would be considered inappropriate, then Amazon would have to have this sort of age verification, or Google or somebody like that, which I know is, not Senator Merman's intention on this, is this sort of accidental part of it, but and catching up all these businesses. So I think that's really important clarification there. I would say that there's still, with the other section, the Section 3 clarification does improve Section 3, but there's still this concern about how does the 2 subsections of Section 3 interplay with each other, even as amended. So this version of Section 3 is better than the other version of Section 3. However, there's still this principal problem of when somebody has a complaint that their information was retained, and they go to one of these providers, and the provider was, supposed to have destroyed it. They have a claim against them. But if you have a complaint that they didn't do age verification and the provider was supposed to have destroyed the information, then how does the third-party provider substantiate that? So that's kind of the crux of the problem here, is how do you effectuate this bill and preserve people's, obviously, right to privacy? So, these are, I think, questions we have to answer, which is, I think, why Senator Blood's conversation yesterday was so interesting, because she proposed some kind of more foundational things that we could do that would make our whole system stronger, to allow us to address these sorts of issues. And sometimes that is what you have to do. You have to take the first steps to create a foundation that allows you to solve other problems. And even if you have a problem, it's very hard to solve. And this gets us into this, twisted up on this sort of bill to try to figure out how to actually implement what the idea is, which is, of course, a good one, is to keep this material out of the hands of kids and give parents a tool for holding these places accountable. I think there's other concerns, like Senator Blood brought up, just about the internet in general and VPNs and how people can end run around these things. I think that merits just further discussion. But as it stands right now, I would say I support this amendment. I still have my reservations about the bill overall for a lot of those reasons I've articulated. So
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. So I hope people continue to have this conversation about this bill so we can figure out what other changes, if this bill goes forward. Right now, I don't know where we're at, or honestly, I don't know what other people are thinking about it. I only really heard from people who have concerns, not people who support it. So I don't know, other than Senator Merman. And again, I appreciate his conversation on it. But if it goes forward, what type of changes are realistic to the bill? What can we do to make it work better? because that should be one of our goals here, is if we're going to pass a law, that make sure the law is as good as we possibly can, and to take into consideration the constructive criticisms that can be offered. So I look forward to, I see Senator Blood's in the queue, so I look forward to hearing what she has to say about this. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator Blood, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Fellow senators, friends all, I'm glad to see we have a few more people in the chamber than we had last night. I hope people are still paying attention and just don't have it in their minds how they're going to vote, but are actually listening to the massive amounts of information I've been sharing over the last 2 days. So I don't know if I stand in support of this amendment. I was fortunate enough to talk to Senator Merman about his pending amendments before we started. And I'm not sure the amendments really address any of the concerns that I have. I think they've taken 1 or 2 words of sentences that I've said and then tried to craft amendments around it. It's kind of my perception, and I don't mean that to be insulting, but that's my perception. With that, I would ask that Senator Merman yield to a question in reference to this most recent amendment.
Senator Merman, would you yield to some questions?
Yes.
Senator Merman, who determines the 30% minimum that's in this amendment? The 1/3 law.
That is by community standards.
Okay, that doesn't really answer my question. So who's the oversight agency that monitors the site?
Well, this is the definition that is used in several other of the age verification bills that are in other states.
Which is one of the reasons those bills are in court. Because the way I read this, the only enforcement, it would be civil lawsuits, but there's no real enforcement. Can you show me in the, I don't have the amendment in front of me, but I did read it, where in the amendment it says how this is enforced?
Excuse me, I didn't hear that question.
Reading the amendment, can you show me which line shows us where the enforcement part of it is?
Yeah, I can get back to you on that.
Because I have to be honest, Senator, I'm not seeing that in the amendment, and I would have shared that with you, but we immediately had to get back to our mics, so I'm not trying to do a gotcha. So I'm concerned about that. And again, I know you're trying to make this better, but I'm not seeing anything in the amendments that talk about what we need to make it better. Have you looked at the age of sexual consent portion that I talked about last night?
Yes.
And how are we fixing that?
The reason we are staying with the age of 18, that is the age that is used in the other age verification bills that have advanced in other states, and it would better conform with federal law using age 18.
I don't know if it conforms better with federal law, but you know the age of majority in Nebraska is 19, and that unfortunately young people can have sex with adults at 16 and 17. So we're allowing them to have intercourse, but disallowing them, and I don't think either is right, but I'm just saying that I think that this is problematic, and I hear your justification, but I respectfully disagree. I know I'll have more questions for you as we move forward on the amendment, Senator Merman, but that is one of my ongoing concerns. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
I'm going to talk more than once because we did talk about data broker registries yesterday and how we need to have that in place. We need an IT committee. Let's combine natural resources and ag and get another committee going on our 13 standing committees and have somebody actually understands IT. Hopefully we'll have if you're getting reelected into this body or elected into this body in the next cycle, because we are lacking that. And let me tell you what else Nebraska is lacking. Do you remember when we talked about the budget and I asked about our cybersecurity budget? I got the most vanilla response from the executive branch on that. And I know our cybersecurity is lacking in Nebraska because there were several sites within our web family that my Spidey sensors on my computers at home would not allow me access to because they weren't safe. Remember, the Russian mafia ripped us off for tens of thousands of dollars during the pandemic, and we were oblivious to it until it happened. We, again, put the cart before the horse. We weren't prepared for cyber theft. We're doing the same thing now. There are consequences, not just the lawsuits. There are consequences, and you are putting Nebraskans in danger because you don't want people to think that you're against something like this.
That's your time, Senator Blood, but you're next in the queue.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's okay to be against bad policy. If you can justify it, it's okay. So Nebraska doesn't have an established privacy program. And that's, I think, one of the reasons that I'm always talking about why don't we have a strategic plan, a living, breathing document that helps us figure out where Nebraska's going, what we need to do, and how we need to pay for it. We are woefully behind when it comes to things that deal with technology, especially in this body. We couldn't even get an appropriate interim study on blockchain and ag. And our farmers could be making so much more money, and our young farmers could be so much more interested if we had invested in that interim study, but I'm not a chair, so I couldn't have made that happen. We don't have a chief privacy officer in Nebraska. Who's our chief privacy officer? Does anybody know? Because I could be wrong. I've never talked to a person who says they're the chief privacy officer. Is anybody here? Everybody's looking down, so apparently nobody knows, or they're just not listening. Congress can't get a national data privacy law passed. You heard Senator Bostar say it. You heard me say it. Good grief, they only passed 27 bills last year. All they're worried about is getting reelected. So we need to fill in the gaps before we pass legislation like this. We do need a data broker registry, but you know what we also need with that is we need a privacy program that's been established. How do we go about doing things like this, and what's the appropriate protocol? So you have somebody that has the knowledge that can say, you know, Senator Merman, I understand what you're trying to do, and this is very honorable, but there's unintended consequences that are going to happen. And those unintended consequences are that we are now exposing the adults who, whether we like it or not, will be utilizing these sites and will now have their personal information open to people who can steal that data. And if you look at the small print on a lot of the sites where they say, we're not going to share your data, usually the next line or the line after that is like, but we are going to share your data with this person or this organization. Usually it's like Cox, Verizon. Who still takes your data? How many hands should we pass your data through? I hope you don't get to be 70 years old and you go to retire and find out that someone bought a house in your name, took out a big loan and bought a fancy boat, took out multiple loans and moved around from state to state to state because they could, because we opened the door to let them do that. And I don't think you remember that I told you that right now it's a big scammer thing to mirror these sites in these states that are making this legislation. And if people aren't super savvy, they fall for it. And their data and their payment information is stolen. And you can say, well, if we save one kid, this bill is worth it. So this bill is worth saving one kid, while thousands of people, tens of thousands of people, had their identity stolen, their location identified. That's not okay. That's an unintended consequence. Nebraska needs to follow something called the National Institute of Standard and Technology Privacy Framework. We have no framework put in place. That's kind of the metrics that states that are ahead of us, of course, are using to make sure that the laws that they pass are within that framework, that do not have unintended consequences, and still they may have unintended consequences because technology moves so fast. But it allows us to have something in place before we pass these bills.
1 minute.
And when I talked to Senator Merman, I was very honest with him. I don't fault him for trying to pass this bill. But until we have a framework in place, I would prefer that he holds on to this bill until next year. And I think it's his priority bill or a speaker priority bill. And you know what? I had a great bill on unfunded and underfunded mandates a couple years ago. It came out 8-0. We had the votes on the floor. It got through general. And our speaker decided that he thought that we shouldn't be held responsible for the money that we spent. And that was not Speaker Arch. I want to make that really clear. And so he purposely adjourned early on select so we couldn't have the debate, even though I had the votes, and then have it get to final in time for us to be done with the session. So I literally got cheated out of a really great bill, as did our taxpayers. Because we also know that that's one of the reasons property
That's your
taxes
time,
are high.
Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Blood. Senator John Kavanaugh, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, thank you, Senator Blood, for the conversation. When I saw you push in a second time, I pushed out so I could be behind you so you could talk some more. But, and I think, again, I think Senator Blood raises some really good points. And, you know, I've said along my concerns about this bill is the effectuation of it, which is how do we make this happen? And I've said I'm not a technical person. So Senator Blood keeps saying we need more technical people here. You're going to need somebody else besides me. But I appreciate what she's saying, and I really do think we need to think about it, because the concerns about identity theft and those, you know, people being taken advantage of as a result of this bill is, you know, the classic unintended consequences that we talk about so often when people are passing bills here or proposing bills, that there's certainly a meritorious objective of this bill. But if we do it wrong, that it will have an unintended consequence of harming Nebraskans. And we don't want to do that. And Senator Blood has said a lot of interesting things, some of which I could understand and some of which I'll probably need more explanation of. But it seems clear to me that as what's currently written, that there's not adequate protections. And we've seen in other places that similar bills, because this bill is almost exactly the same as the Kansas bill, and my guess is if I went and looked at the Texas bill, it'd be very similar to that bill, but that the end result is that people can still get access. Young people in particular can get access through these VPNs, so it doesn't necessarily serve that aim either. And so if our goal is to erect hurdles to people under the age of 18 from accessing these sites, that there may be other ways to do that, and ways that would not subject Nebraskans to being the risk of identity theft and all of those things that Senator Blood has talked about that are potential pitfalls of identity theft. Somebody taking out credit cards in someone else's name and purchasing things and ruining your credit and a lot of that other stuff. So I think that those are real concerns. I mean, I've originally said when I read the bill, I had concerns just about how it actually works. I had not even thought about these other concerns that Senator Blood has raised. And so I think that there are things that need to be improved in this. And I do not know Senator Merman is interested in finding ways to improve how this bill works. And so I think it is really a fruitful conversation to talk through what the particular issues are. So I would just say, I think I'm going to run out of time, so I'll push my light again. Other concerns, I've talked about the Section 3, 1 and 2 interacting with each other. Going back to the underlying bill, underlying AM 2585, which is the committee amendment, I have some concerns about what exactly is reasonable age verification. And I think this is some of the stuff that Senator Blood has touched on, but I'm just curious about, and I think this is on page 2, starting at line 16. So what can be used? There's a digitized identification card, including a digital copy of a driver's license.
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President, which I get. I think you can scan or something a driver's license. 2, a government issued identification. I assume, again, you would scan that or something. But 3, this is the one that I'm curious about. A financial document or other document that is a reliable proxy for age. I don't know what that means. So I'm curious. I won't ask Senator Merman on the mic, but if he has an opportunity to explain what that one is, I would be curious to know. And then 4 is any commercially reasonable method that relies on public or private transactional data to verify the age of a person attempting to access material. So I think that's those third-party vendors. And I have other questions about the third-party vendors as well. I did look at the one website that Senator Merman mentioned for third-party vendors, and I have some questions about that, but I'll push my light and keep talking. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator Michaela Kavanaugh, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. First, because I know my mom watches a lot, I just want to address that my hand is fine. No good deed goes unpunished. This morning, I was getting coffee for myself and my brother, and I had the 2 cups of coffee in my hand at the hotel this morning, and the lid popped off, and it was very, very hot. So thankfully, we have a doctor of the day who has wrapped my hand, and I think it looks more serious than it is. It hurts, but it's not blistering or anything. So I knew my mom would be concerned, and also with the scandal around Princess Kate Middleton and whether or not she's got bandages on her hands and all of that, I thought I should just address it immediately. So coffee burn, if any of you watched Seinfeld, I felt very much like Kramer. And that is what this is about. And I am right-handed, but thankfully my job today is mostly talking. So here we are. Okay, so Senator Merman has introduced this amendment, and I was trying to listen, but I was also getting my hand wrapped. So I appreciate what Senator Merman is attempting to do. As I mentioned last night, I do have concerns over my own children getting access to things. We do have, parental controls. Our kids have Kindle tablet things, but they have like a kid mode actually. And so that's the only mode that they're allowed to use. And they're not really phones, but they look like phones. They're basically like a phone that's a calculator and has little games on it. It doesn't connect to the internet because we don't want them to be able to do things. But my kids do take our phones and get on YouTube and watch reels and things on YouTube. And I am always very concerned about, what they might come across on YouTube. So as a parent, I very much appreciate what Senator Merman is trying to do. But as I stated last night, I have some questions. I don't even know if they're concerns so much as questions about how this would work in practicality, because we do have to balance children's safety and security with also adults' rights to access information, and then of course business interests, which I'm not particularly concerned about business interests. I think they're doing just fine, but we do have to be good stewards and don't want to regulate things that unnecessarily or too cumbersome. So the crux of my concern here, and stick with me, is actually the committee amendment as written, and I'm not sure yet if this amendment addresses this concern. It seems to open up the opportunity for scam artists to sue companies, because if we are requiring the age verification, but we are also requiring that information not be stored anywhere, so we cannot verify that the age verification happened, then people may start suing companies claiming that they provided access to their platform to a minor without doing the age verification, and the company won't have a way to prove that they did the age verification. because we are requiring them not to keep a record. So I don't really know how you address that, but it does seem like it opens us up to some exploitation of legal action against these companies by bad actors. And I know this body is always concerned about bad actors when it comes to government programs. So I wanted to raise this concern about bad actors when it comes to private businesses and how we might be creating an avenue for exploitation. I have additional thoughts on this, but I will get back in the queue to talk about it.
That's your time.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator Frederickson, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. Good morning, Nebraskans. So I was in the chair last night, so I didn't have the opportunity to participate in this debate, but was able to listen to the whole thing. You know, it's when you're up there, you have to really focus on everything that's being said. And I have to say, I'm kind of a little bit surprised because I entered this thinking I was absolutely going to support this bill. You know, I think that Senator Merman has brought forward, I think in really good faith, a genuine concern, and I think a proposal to tackle this. I think, you know, I think a lot about this as a young parent and all the technology that's out there. You think about AI, for example, like the world is rapidly changing and our kids have access to a lot of things. And in some ways that can be really scary and, you know, being not so sure what kids are reading or accessing. And at the same time, that's the reality that we're living in. So I entered this, you know, thinking I was going to support this bill, and then actually listening to the debate last night, I was really beginning to have more concerns about some of the privacy concerns that were being brought up by Senator Blood and some of the discussion that was happening on the floor. And I think Senator Merman spoke a lot about these third parties, and I actually had a couple questions because, and before I ask you on the mic, Senator Merman, I'll kind of give you a little heads up. I think you'd mentioned last night that these verifications already exist for things like gambling or alcohol. And I'm just kind of curious to learn a little bit more if there's ever been compromise with identity. Some of the concerns that have been brought up about identity compromise. Do we have any history of that with those types of purposes? So Senator Merman might be willing to yield the question.
Senator Merman, would you yield to some questions?
Certainly. Thank you, Senator Merman. So my question was, you know, one thing I was unaware of is that these third parties that do these verifications already do exist for things like alcohol and gambling, et cetera, et cetera. And some of the concerns that have been brought up has been around hacking, data privacy. Do we know if, since these have already been used, have there been cases where there have been privacy-related concerns or data hacking that we're aware of with any of these third parties at this point?
Well, this bill is passed in 10 states, and there haven't been, you know, I can't say that there haven't been any issues, but it hasn't been a big issue in the other states.
So it hasn't been brought to, okay. And even without this bill, so with these third parties with like alcohol sales, for example, or gambling, has that been a concern historically that you're aware of?
No, it's used for those other reasons, like you said, and
Sure.
and the age verification providers, it's double blind, so they don't know why the person is asking for age verification at all.
Okay, great. Thank you, Senator Merman. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
So that's helpful for me to hear as well, and I might ask Senator Blood some questions about that too, because, you know, again, I think what I'm understanding from the debate and the conversation, and certainly I think where I stand as well, is that I think there's kind of consensus around ensuring that young folks in our state are safe online. And I think the crux that I'm hearing is more about, you know, how do we best execute that, right? Are we potentially compromising data privacy, et cetera, in that process? The other thing that, you know, it's funny, I'm 36, I'm almost 37, and I never thought of myself as very old, but I learned last night what a VPN was, and I'm kind of embarrassed to admit that. But, you know, I think I bring that up to say that there's obviously ways to mitigate this, and that argument can be made about other things. You know, one thing that Senator Hunt brought up last night is that, you know, there's also kind of this component of, thank you, Mr. President, parental choice here, and you know, kind of ensuring that you're having these conversations directly with your children on, what to access and what's safe. And, I know U.S. House Speaker Mike Johnson he's gone on record about how he does this in his own house with his son. And I read into that a little bit more. There's software available. Speaker Johnson said, quote, "It sends a report to your accountability partner. My accountability partner right now is my son, Jack. He's 17. So he and I get a report about all the things that are on our phones, our devices once a week. If anything objectionable comes up, your accountability partner gets an immediate notice. I'm proud to tell you my son has got a clean slate." So he's monitoring within his house. And I think that's something that parents can individually decide as well what works best in their homes as well. So thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Frederickson. Senator Hughes would like to recognize some guests in the north balcony. 60 fourth graders from Milford Elementary. Please stand and be recognized by your Nebraska Legislature. Senator Blood, you're recognized to Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Business and Labor Committee will hold an executive session at 10 a.m. under the south balcony. Business and Labor Committee at 10 a.m. under the south balcony.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Senator Blood, you're recognized to speak, and this is your third time on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. Fellow senators, friends all, I continue to have questions, and I just really hope you're listening to the things I'm bringing forward. If we were in a boat together and the boat was sinking, and we knew that we had to get people out of the boat to save a few by throwing them into the shark-infested waters, what kind of person would you be? Would you be the person that was throwing people that you didn't necessarily care for over the boat for the sharks? Would you jump into the shark water? What would you do? This boat is sinking, friends. And you heard me say it yesterday. This doesn't do enough while doing too much. Unintended consequences that you will be blamed for when it becomes public because you went ahead and moved a bill forward that isn't ready for prime time. Now, people are talking to me about negotiating between general and select, but the kinds of negotiations that I'm concerned about are things that should have public hearings. We should have public hearings on data registries, on data broker registries, or we should get a security information officer put in place. And then bills like this, Senator Cow's bill, Senator Merman's bill, should have been Senator Bostar's bill that he did for Attorney General, can be brought back and be made better and have in those guardrails that we keep saying we want. We've used that word a lot the last 2 years, and really protect the children, but more so stop the unintended and at least slow them down, the unintended consequences. So I'm looking at this amendment, and again, I feel like the amendments, like you picked a few words of what I said, but the entire sentences kind of like went into the universe. And I know that's true of certain people in the body because you guys simply weren't here. And again, there's so many people missing, and it's the morning. So a site then, based on the 1/3 law, can have 25% content of offensive stuff and not be impacted. So a site that has thousands of offensive items, what are we talking about when we say 25%? There's something wrong with that rule. And to say, again, we keep saying other states do it, but all of these other states are going to court. And you can say, oh, well, one judge said this. Well, we also know there's multiple levels of the judicial system. So that doesn't really mean anything. And meanwhile, scammers are having a heyday because of all this bad legislation. If you do a 25% content, as opposed to the 1/3, there's still a lot of harmful material. And then I still have concerns about the oversight on this amendment. So it's based on what people generally find offensive. Well, that doesn't tell me the oversight agency. That doesn't tell me how it's going to be handled. It's just words. Words you're throwing out into the universe that literally mean nothing. And we've passed bills like that before, by the way. And now you go back to those bills and they were cause bills like this one. They literally did nothing. We put things in place where people could sue, but we never put into place how it could happen. We lack that in a lot of our bills. We're like, oh, we insist on stopping this horrible thing, whatever it happens to be, but we don't put how we implement it in the bill.
1 minute.
But nobody on the floor wants to push a button and say, oh, I'm against babies, puppies, trafficking, whatever the phrase we're using at the time. Don't vote for a bill that's not ready for prime time, because many of you will still be in the body and face the unintended consequences that this bill is going to cause. Don't say, well, it's going on in other states, because other states are involved in lawsuits. And most of the other states that push this do not have security officers in place, do not have a framework in place. Can Nebraska ever be a leader in anything politically? Or are we just going to keep taking bills from other states and say, no, it's a good idea because we got it from this state and nothing bad's happened yet? Or are we going to use our brains, move forward, have good legislation, do our kumbaya, and be proud of what we put out? Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Blood. Senator Merman, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Lieutenant Governor. I'm going to try and address a few of the concerns that have been brought up both last night and this morning. First of all, there is an amendment that I'm currently working on and will further strengthen how secure this age verification process will be. And I've got that amendment. I've got an amendment already on select, and I'm working on another one that will do that. So if you're on the fence about this legislation and your concern is data privacy, I would ask that you support it on general file, so on select we can add an extra privacy amendment to strengthen the bill even more. And talk about other methods of age verification. Many of these websites already take credit cards. After all, the websites have to make a profit to stay in business, and the research shows us that the pornography business is booming. Right now there are things like premium accounts and pay-per-view which take credit cards. I would argue submitting a credit card number is a far greater privacy concern than a reasonable age verification. Opponents are saying porn websites should stop allowing credit card usage on these sites due to privacy concerns. So it's hard to understand why ID is somehow far more dangerous. You might argue this is because there is the ability to have third-party credit card moderators such as PayPal. This is true, and why this bill allows third-party age verification systems. So allow me to read this description from the Age Verification Providers Association. In medicine, we have double-blinded clinical trials, and that's one where neither the researchers nor the patient are aware of whether the latter has had a real drug or a placebo. A double-blind approach is applied to age checks, where the age-restricted website is not given any information about the identity of the user, and the age verification provider records no data about the identity of the website seeking to confirm the user's age. No certified age verification provider is permitted to create or retain a list of the sites any individual customer has accessed. In fact, to do so would be asking for trouble, as it would make sure a database is an attractive target for hackers. The best way to prevent data being hacked, and arguably the only way, is not to create a store of data in the first place. So age verification providers avoid doing so. In the light of previous data breaches, the age-restricted sites will not want to use age verification providers which put their clients' personal data at risk. Providers who cannot provide guarantees of this will not be successful in the market. And the only guarantee that will be convincing is to design systems that simply do not record any data about the online behavior of users in the first place. When I started working on this bill last summer, I think there were 3 states that had passed similar laws. And then as we got to hearing, if I remember correctly, there were 7 states at that time. And now by now, there's 10 states that have
1
passed.
minute.
Thank you. Passed this law. And actually, this bill is in the process in 20 other states. So, talking about Nebraska keeping up with the rest of the nation, right now we're going to be somewhere in the middle. But my hope is that we won't be one of the last states to pass this reasonable way to protect children on the internet. Thank you, Mr. Lieutenant Governor.
Thank you, Senator Merman. Senator Hunt, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. Good morning, Nebraskans. The reason I stand against this kind of government overregulation is because, well, for several reasons. A, not everything that we don't like should be illegal. And the solution for every problem does not necessarily live in the legislature. For example, Senator Merman just mentioned PayPal and using credit card processors and different ways to pay for content that you would possibly access on a porn website. Well, the market is already regulating itself in this way. With PayPal, you have to be, is this the tornado drill? The optional voluntary tornado drill? Okay. In any case, PayPal already kind of self-regulates with this. You have to have like a pre-approval to do many things on PayPal, including access adult content. On their website, PayPal's policy states, any adult content delivered digitally, including video on demand and webcam activities. PayPal may be restricted from processing payments in certain jurisdictions for adult DVDs, magazines, and other adult-themed products and services. There are many websites that distribute pornographic content where you can't pay with PayPal. Other things that PayPal restricts payments for include gambling, investments, cryptocurrency, prescription items. I've purchased prescriptions online before and had to get pre-approval from PayPal to do that. And to do that, I had to prove my age. So this is something that the market is already providing for and seems to be working well because I've done it myself. I've had to go through the pre-approval process myself to buy prescriptions online, for example. Another way that this is already kind of regulated and controlled, as I mentioned last night, and Senator Frederickson reminded us this morning in his time on the mic, there are various and sundry types of software that you can purchase, that you can access for free. There are many organizations that sponsor free downloads of software like the one Speaker Mike Johnson uses to share with his son to see if they're both looking at porn that they share together. But there are also different types of blockers and things that you can put on your phone, on your computer. I use them in my home because I know they exist. And this is, again, what the market has provided to already provide a solution to this problem that LB 1092 is seeking to solve. Would Senator Merman yield to a question?
Would Senator Merman, would you yield to some questions?
Yes.
Thank you, Senator Merman. I have read the bill a couple times, and I just have a couple questions again about how it would work. And maybe I don't know what I'm talking about, which is super possible, but there's going to be people who don't want to go through the age verification process to access pornography. There's going to be people who are going to continue to access pornography, and they will go to websites, they will use VPNs, they will do what they want to do so that they don't have to put their age verification, identification, credit card, whatever the method may be, into the computer. Will people who knowingly do this be liable in any way under the law, under LB 1092?
No. There's no, this law would not address that at all.
Okay.
And by the way, there's always ways to get around any law. You know, for instance, buying alcohol, kids can use a fake ID, things like that. But it's just, you know, doing the best we can to prevent minors from accessing porn.
Right. That's totally right. But the difference is, if a minor uses a fake ID to buy alcohol, they're liable. That's a crime. They've committed a crime then. And so I'm wondering under this bill, if people who knowingly, deliberately flout the law by not submitting their age verification, are they then liable in any way?
No. The provider would be, of porn would be liable if.
That's time, senators.
Oh, thank you.
If they
Thank you,
didn't use
Senator
age
Merman.
verification.
Senator Merman.
Thanks.
Senator John Kavanaugh, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, I do look forward to seeing the improved amendment that Senator Merman's working on to address privacy concerns. But let's see, where did I leave off? I was talking about any commercially available reasonable method that relies on public or private transaction data to verify the age of a person attempting to access the material. So I guess my one question, Senator Merman in his opening last night mentioned an example. I don't have my computer open, but there was a site that was Verify or Trust Verify or something, some kind of generic sounding verification name. But on their website, they have, this is how you do this, and scanning IDs and things like that, which, I think is the intention of this. But so this is, again, I'm not going to put Senator Merman on the spot because I guess I'm just telling you all my concerns and thoughts about this, and you can take it for what you want, and if you want to address it, you can. But my interpretation of this is you could sign up for this service, and then it would, I don't know what you call it, and this might be a Senator Blood question, but like they give you maybe a digital token or some kind of identifier that would then be on your computer so that they would send it to whatever age verification site or a site that requires age verification. So Senator Merman said other things use this, gambling sites and purchasing alcohol, which I didn't know you could purchase alcohol on the internet. But so they send the age verification or token or whatever you want to call it, digital transaction data maybe is what's listed in the bill. So they send it. So I was, of course, thinking, we've been talking about like VPN is a way that kids could get around this. But the reason this first part raised my, I guess, antenna was any financial document or other document that's a reliable proxy for age. I just wonder if we're talking about other ways kids get around this stuff. I just wonder if somebody could take their parents or an adult's ID and sign up for one of these sites, and then it's just like a one-time. Then they put the ID back in the wallet or whatever, and then they have the digital token or whatever it's called and continue to access these sites. So that was my initial thought, is how big of a hurdle is that really if somebody could get around it and it's not a perpetual verification. I'm of course not advocating for that. I'm just saying these are hurdles I see to the implementation of this. But then the other question was this financial document. I don't know what that means, but I would guess that, again, if a kid's going to go around the system and they could just pull out like a mortgage receipt out of the trash or something, I don't know what is a financial document that proves that you're over 18. Student loan payments, something along those lines. But then they scan that in to some site, and that's not something somebody's going to miss, and that's an easy way for kids to get around it. So those are just some technical concerns I just had as I was reading through this, in terms of actually making it effective. And I would say I did, again, quickly scan the Kansas version. I don't think the Kansas version had this part about the financial transaction document. So I'm curious where that idea came from. I don't know if Senator Merman wants to think on that question. and can address it later. It looks like the queue is getting low, so maybe we will get to a vote on this amendment, which again, I support this amendment because it does make the bill better in the current form. I do look forward to seeing where we get on further amendments, but I think that this has been, if we are going to have a forthcoming amendment that will address some of the concerns, I think it demonstrates the importance of this debate, and particularly, again, to draw your attention to Senator Blood's contribution to this debate, I think was pretty helpful in getting us somewhere on this. So I don't know if I had any more times on this time or not, but thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator Michaela Kavanaugh, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to yield my time to Senator Blood.
Senator Blood, you have 4 minutes, 45 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. President. So I continue to listen to the answers, and I am still against the amendment and the underlying bill because we're really not getting anywhere close to what we've been talking about the last 2 days. And Senator John Kavanaugh, I know you're such an effective listener, but I actually talked about all pass yesterday. I used Louisiana as an example. So what you do is you basically get approved. They used it in correlation with the same type of digital technology that you get your digital ID, because of course they're ahead of us on that, in Louisiana for your driver's license. And so it's kind of like the token that you're thinking of. And by the way, if your kid's smarter than you, they're going to be able to get that information to use it. I think we're mostly talking about paid sites, by the way. And most little kids that look at porn aren't going to the paid sites. And I know one of these amendments are supposed to address the concerns about social media. And again, this is where I feel like I'm talking into a void. My concerns are that the states that are pushing laws like this forward are now going to social media. There's a really interesting story on this on NPR this morning. And I agreed with some of what the expert said and some of what the expert didn't say. But the bottom line was that parents shouldn't let their kids have access freely to the social media until those kids are older. Gee, what an easy solution that doesn't require legislation. I know that some of you are pretty young, but I remember the Communications Decency Act, 1996, which actually pertained to a lot of what we are talking about right now. But I also remember that the ACLU sued Congress, or whoever they sue, to change the language because it was problematic, much like this bill. And of course, they won in the Supreme Court in 1997. We look at other countries. France also proposed stuff like this, and they promised that there would be no problems when it came to age verification and porn and restrictions. But what they found is that there was problems and there were unintended consequences. And I could sit on the internet for an hour and find you story after story after story. I kind of feel like Dan Parsons. Dan Parsons lost his job on the conservative talk radio show in Lincoln. I don't know what channel that is, for using the F word. You know what the F word is? Facts. I'm proud to say I've been using the F word for the last 2 days. But friends, I'm not just talking so I can hear myself talk. I'm talking because I just am begging you to pay attention to the facts. And I don't understand. And by the way, if I ever see you guys in a crowd, you all better have your backs to me because I won't be able to identify you because I never see your faces up front. I will say Senator Reapy usually is pretty attentive. He usually turns around and listens and shakes his head, and I know he's paying attention. I appreciate that, Senator Reapy. Senator Kavanaugh's really good at paying attention. But otherwise, it's pretty much Senator Lowe. He usually stands up and does a stretch and watches and turns on a watch and listens. I appreciate that. But otherwise, it's pretty much the back of people's heads. I do appreciate that we haven't listened to the silliness on the mic about this bill. But friends, listen. It's time to use the F word. Facts, data. You can't fix this between general and select. I like Senator Merman. He's a super nice guy. I don't agree with him on a lot of issues, but that doesn't mean he's a bad person. But this is a bad bill. You better think really hard. You don't have to vote no, but you can be present not voting. Because say we're going to work on this between general and select would be a lie. We can't fix it. And I would work with him, but then I would have to do this all over again. I bet you're probably sick of me talking on this mic. I enjoy it, but we have a lot of really good bills I'd like to get to. And I know that you guys have a lot of bills you'd like to get to. I'd really like to get my tartan bill that we talked about on consent, because there's a lot of Girl Scouts that worked really hard over the last few years to make that happen.
Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Blood. Senator Ballard would like to recognize some guests in the North Balcony, ninth graders from Lincoln Northwest High School. Please stand and be recognized by your Nebraska Legislature. Senator Merman, you're recognized to speak.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Lieutenant Governor. I have spoken quite a bit about this bill and, what it's done in other states and prospects going forward, exactly what it does and how it, one of the most important things that we do is to protect our personal information in every way we possibly can. I do realize that there are ways to make this bill even better than it is, and I am committing to work on it between general and select. So I want to continue to work with Senator Blood and Senator John Kavanaugh, Michaela Kavanaugh, others that have some concerns. But I've just got to say that no bill is perfect. There's always ways that bills and laws can be improved, and I'm committed to doing that going forward. So I would just like to advance this to select file and continue to work on it and look at what's done in other states. I've already done that, but there are, like I said, there are some ways that we can make it even better. So with that, that'll be my last time talking on it, and appreciate your green vote for the amendment and the judiciary amendment and the judiciary amendment is a replacement for the bill. So appreciate a green vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Merman. Seeing no one else in the queue, you're recognized to close on the amendment and waive. Members, the question is the adoption of AM 3198. All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
Thirty ayes, 1 nay on the adoption of AM 3198, Mr. President.
AM 3198 is adopted. Returning to discussion of the committee amendment. Senator Michaela Kavanaugh, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you to Senator Merman for his willingness to work on improving his bill. I think it just shows how serious he is about moving this forward. And I know that there are things in here that are good, and there are things in here that are technically just kind of wonky. So I appreciate him bringing that amendment. And then there's another amendment coming on select file. So, yeah. I've been trying to follow the conversation this morning. Honestly, it's been a little bit hard because people have been talking about the tax briefing this morning, and so then kind of getting these like truncated conversations. So I haven't quite tuned in entirely to what the conversation has been from Senator Blood, and I just yielded her time, and then I didn't hear what she had to say. So I'm wondering if she would want to talk again. Okay, then I will yield my time to Senator Blood.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator Blood, you have 3 minutes, 35 seconds.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. I'm not sure what you asked me before you yielded me time because I was talking to Senator Hansen. So I talked about what happened at the federal level when they tried to push legislation like this forward in Congress without really thinking it through. And it happened in around 96, and then I believe the Supreme Court shot it down in 97. So again, we keep hearing, well, this is going on in other states and it's going to court, and in some cases they've won, but what level in the judicial process do they win? Because we know there's multiple levels, and it hasn't been to the Supreme Court yet. But I think the bottom line, and again, I've had at least one senator come and talk to me about it that's actually listening, and I really appreciate that. It's that, we have become a nanny state. And when you give your ID in a restaurant or a bar, they're not taking your personal data. Unless, of course, they have a scanner in their pocket, which sometimes they do, and they're scanning your personal information to steal it later. Unfortunately, that happens too. In airports, make sure you always have your credit cards protected because people go by with scanners all the time, big crowds. You always wonder how people steal your identity, steal your credit card. You gotta get those special wallets, protect your technology. But here's what we aren't getting to when it comes to this bill. What's harmful and who defines it? That is never clear in this bill. All we keep hearing is other states are doing it. That's not an answer. The Heritage Foundation, which I know many of you know, they are a conservative think tank. I do read their stuff because I always like to know what's coming down the pike. They've come out publicly to say that bills like this allow policymakers like us to better police content that pertains to LGBTQ+. I don't think you guys understand that so many of these bills that come from organizations that are considered very conservative have a next step. And we're seeing that in states like Florida. First it's this, then it's telling parents the age that their child is allowed to use social media or be on the internet, right? Because we know better than parents, just like we know better than doctors in this body. You're opening a door to push your values on people who may not share those values. But more importantly, no matter how you justify this, you are opening up tens of thousands of Nebraskans to potential fraud, to identity theft. And you can talk about credit cards, but Senator Hunt is correct. They're way ahead when it comes to things like this. Everybody waited for Congress to do something, and Congress won't do anything because they won't fight these big corporations. All you got to do is look where they get their money when they run for election to know that. I usually am willing to work between general and select. But friends, these amendments,
1 minute.
no matter how good his intentions, change nothing that I talked about in the introduction. And some of you will not be here next year. So when it hits the fan, you can say, you know what, I'm not there. It's got nothing to do with me, but you're the one that passed this bill. If you feel strongly about this issue, do it right. Don't just do it so you can wave your flag and say you did it. Do it right, wait until next year, and get it done so everybody is protected. And then as we bring all these other bills forward, those bills are protected too, and you will look like a hero. All knowing when it comes to IT. That's a good thing. Please, please consider the information that was shared for those of you that actually listened and make a good decision. I don't care if it's a priority bill or not. Sometimes we win, sometimes we lose. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Blood. Senator John Kavanaugh, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Again, Senator Blood's making a lot of good sense. And which they're valid concerns about what is the sort of broader goal of creating hurdles to people exercising their freedoms that, we don't necessarily approve of, but people are still free to exercise. And we had a lot of conversations, people get real protective of their right to bear arms and talk about government intervention there. And there are folks who say, well, maybe we shouldn't have them, in as many places as we do. We've had a lot of robust conversations, we'll say, about the Second Amendment in my time here. And, it might be fruitful for people to, think about some of the stuff that we're talking about that's protected under free expression and freedom of speech and the First Amendment, and frame it of how you would feel if it was somebody telling you that you had to do an online age verification, to use your gun or go to the shooting range or something along those lines, or some kind of akin exercise of your Second Amendment right. And we've had a lot of opposition to even small government intervention or regulation of people walking around with guns. And I would argue that people walking around in the public space with a gun has more impact on other members of society than someone else's exercise of their free speech or their First Amendment rights within their own home. And so those are things just to think about in terms of what is a good idea to do. Senator Hunt made a really good point earlier about not every problem is for the purview of the legislature or something along those lines. It's basically that not every problem out there is something that needs to be solved by us. There are these problems of proliferation of content that we don't want kids to get. We don't want them to stumble on it on accident. We certainly want to have reasonable regulations in place, and we want to give parents tools to make sure that their kids are not being subject to this. And I do think that that is a good objective, but we also have to be conscious of what other impacts that might have. Senator Merman talked about in his introduction or at some other point about these bills have been introduced in 7 states or passed in 7 states, been introduced in 20 states, and it has resulted in these companies pulling out of those states, which sounds great. You're like, oh, well, smut peddlers are gone, right? But the problem with freedom of speech expression is that we have to protect everyone's right to speak and to express themselves, even the ones we don't like. And that's so putting up regulations that act as effectively as a ban is problematic, which is why I appreciate Senator Merman's willingness to work on this bill going forward. I would caution folks as you think about thank you, Mr. President, this is the right thing to do. Think about those sorts of questions about government intervention infringing on people's lives and rights in a way that is more restrictive than is necessary, has bigger implications. Actually, I was going to talk about one other thing, so I'm going to run out of time, so I'll push my light again. And then we'll, I guess, see where we're heading today. But it's just because the objective we agree on doesn't mean that the path to there is right. And Senator Blood has raised a lot of questions about the path that we're on to that objective. And I think it is really important to take a step back and listen to what she's been saying and the issues she's been raising about this, and think about how this bill at this moment doesn't address those concerns. So thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator Michaela Kavanaugh, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. And thank you, Senator Blood, for speaking on my time impromptu last time. I did hear you this time, and you talked about determining what's harmful and who decides that. And that is a good question. I've been struggling with putting my finger on what exactly it is that doesn't sit right with me with this bill, because the intent of the bill does sit right with me, but it's the execution of it, and I don't know, and I feel bad for not being able to offer really constructive feedback on how to fix the execution of it. But I do have concerns over restricting access for adults and infringing on business practices. I did look up the Texas Pornhub dispute, and they are suing the state of Texas and saying that it does infringe on free speech for adults. But one thing that I am more globally concerned about with this and other efforts to police pornography, adult content, is what that is going to do. Because right now, places like Pornhub are mainstream. Like, everybody knows the name of it. They're mainstream. But if we push companies like that out of the state and we stigmatize the utilization of these things, these platforms, then what does that do to the individuals that are featured in this content? It marginalizes them as well. And that pushes people, when we push people who are in the sex trade to the fringes, we endanger them. We make it more likely that this is going to be something that is conducted through human trafficking. And I guess that's really where I am unsettled, is that if we continue to stigmatize the sex trade and marginalize sex work, then we are creating an environment that allows for the exploitation of these people and endangers their lives and their safety. And I know that this body has spent a great deal of effort and energy on human trafficking, but I'm concerned about the effort to stigmatize sex work and to stigmatize sex and sexuality is going to result in a greater market for trafficked individuals. And when we destigmatize it and we say, yes, this is not for children, absolutely.
1 minute.
But this is adult content, and we need to find a balance of the business practices, of not stigmatizing it, to creating a culture that is promoting trafficking essentially. And that's, I guess, sitting here listening and reading the articles, that's kind of where I am very much struggling. I do not want to enable human trafficking. And I want to make sure that we are being very thoughtful when we do anything around sex work, and that we just don't automatically jump on it and say, hey, we don't want kids to see porn. No, we don't. We don't want kids to see porn. Contrary to what people like to say
That's
about
your
me.
time, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator John Kavanaugh, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to hear some more from Senator Blood if she would like my time. I would yield my time to Senator Blood.
Senator Blood, you have 4 minutes, 50 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. President. Fellow Senators, friends all, I still stand opposed, but that's not a surprise because I'm not hearing anything that addresses any of my concerns. I'm hearing snippets of words that I say put into other sentences that have nothing to do with my questions. And Senator Michaela Kavanaugh, you probably know this, but you know Washington State just passed a strippers bill of rights. I mean, it's interesting how states can differ in what their priorities are. They want to protect vulnerable people, be they children, be they adults. And I think that's really interesting. It's not a bill that I would necessarily be interested in doing, but I always like to see what other states are doing. I'm going to say this again because I'm not sure that I've made this clear. There's a lot of noise, so I hope you can hear me. There's no state agency in this bill, in the amendments, that are designated to monitor any of this. Not the Attorney General, not DHHS, just someone can sue if there's a violation. We had a bill like that before. It basically, and no offense to the attorneys, but it basically invited ambulance chasers to wait outside abortion clinics for somebody to come out to let them know that they could sue because they had an abortion. I don't know if you remember that bill, but in that bill, you never put any implementation into it. So guess what happened? Nothing. You can do better if abortion's important to you, if child pornography is important to you, if children gaining access to any pornography is important to you. Why would you not want to write this bill correctly? Why? I think you're all smart people. You got here. I knocked on more doors than I will ever be able to count. I could sleep for a year if I counted that many sheep, if only. We don't pass bills because we don't want to be seen as being against the cause. I get that. But you got to be brave, and you have to be able to tell the people that you represent that you still are against something that's offensive, but you don't want to pass a bill that is going to endanger other Nebraskans. And it isn't your choice to decide if we need to punish those Nebraskans because they choose to look at porn. You heard Senator Hunt about it. Why are we legislating things that really aren't our business? And in a way, that's what you're doing. It's not our business as other adults, if they're not hurting anybody, look at porn. It's just not our business. I am not a fan. I can tell you that for several years, I chaired the White Ribbon Campaign, which encourages young couples to love each other and learn more about each other and not utilize porn as the bar for their relationship. So it's not like I'm sitting here saying that porn is okay. But boy, I am against all of this nanny government stuff that we've been passing the last 2 years. A lot of you in here are Republicans, and gosh, you guys used to be about no government overreach. Where did that go? Now, everything we think that we don't like, we try and stop. And we're not even doing it with good policy. I do not fault you for standing up for your convictions, even though that may not be your constituents' convictions, but I fault you for bad legislation. I like Senator Merman.
1 minute.
I know this is a priority bill. I respect Senator Arch, who would like to see us fix it between general and select, but I don't think that can happen. You don't have the framework in place. That goes before the cart, not the other way around. Have some guts. This is wrong. You can do better. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Blood. Senator DeKay has some guests in the north balcony, fourth graders from Verdigris Public Schools in Verdigris, Nebraska. Please stand and be recognized by your Nebraska Legislature. Thanks. Senator McKinney, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll yield the rest of my time to Senator Blood if she would like.
Senator Blood, you have 4 minutes, 50 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Senator McKinney. You knew the answer to that question already, right? Thank you. You know, I just hope one person hears me. One person. You know, we both sent out handouts. And I'd like to point out that Senator Merman, bless his soul, sent out op-eds, people's opinions. You know what we're not getting? The F word. We're not getting facts from him. We're not getting facts, data, science. I mean, we know the facts, data, science show us that pornography is harmful to children. We understand that. We're all smart-ish. Right? But how we go about addressing that is writing good, solid legislation. How we go about writing this is putting a data broker registry together, utilizing the national framework that's been set for all states, that only a small handful have started using, and catching up with the rest of the world. It isn't passing a bill saying, well, we'll revisit it next year and then put in all the things you're talking about. Well, likely you'll forget that. But more so, once the bill goes into law, it doesn't matter. You've already opened that gate. When you're at a town hall in your community, how are you going to explain to your constituents that you opened them up to be affected by fraud? You know, it's already tough enough in the world today. I sound like a theme song for a show right now. It's already tough enough in the world today for people that use credit cards, for people that use the internet, because it is so easy for your data to be stolen and collected. It is so easy for people who have nothing to do all day long but figure out how to scam you, figure out how to scam you. That's why all those scammer sites popped up as soon as those states started pushing forward those laws that weren't written correctly. Right? And people in their urgency to get to the porn sites aren't paying attention. You know, their wives are asleep, it's 3 a.m, he's working in the den, she's working in the den, whatever the scenario is. We want to make sure we don't leave anybody out. They're trying to hurry up and get done whatever they're trying to get done, see whatever they're trying to see. They're not paying attention. And you can say, well, it serves them right because they're looking at porn, because we heard that yesterday. Maybe, but that's not for us to decide. We live in the United States. We live in America. We've had people fight for our rights to be able to do stuff like that, no matter how dumb it is. But we don't have the right to open this gate, to make it more dangerous for the rest of Nebraskans, period. It's not about saving one kid. It's about doing it right and saving more than one kid. And I just can't get why nobody else gets this. I will give kudos to Senator Ben Hansen, who actually came up and talked to me about it. There's a lot of senators that are starting to believe that we've become a nanny state, that we don't care what legislation we put through as long as it looks like we care. We care about the puppies, the babies, whatever it is, the topic, this time children and pornography, because we don't want to be that person who's challenged.
1 minute.
But if you watch my social media, you see I don't mind being challenged, and I have very long dialogue sometimes with trolls, because you need to have those dialogues no matter how uncomfortable they are. I know your comfort level on this for many of you is not good. But things aren't black and white when it comes to legislation. It is black and white about how we protect our children, but you got to do it correctly. You can put up a swing set for the kids to play on, that's a good thing. But if you don't hook the chains properly and the kids fall off, that's on you. That's what we're doing, guys. We're not attaching the swing set properly, the chains to the swing set. People are going to get hurt. People are going to get scammed. And it's going to be on the Nebraska Legislature if this bill gets through to final reading. And again, this doesn't make Senator Merman a bad person or anything negative. It just means that this bill is not ready for prime time. And
That's your time,
I'm begging you.
Thank you, Senator Blood. Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President.
This is your final time on the amendment.
All right. Thank you, Mr. President. Okay, so I'm going to echo some of the things that Senator Blood just was saying. The intention is good, but we can't move policy forward just because of the intention. We have to have the execution right. And I still am not convinced that this bill is going to, if enacted, function the way that we all collectively would like to see it function. I think that there is something that we probably all as a legislature are on board with, is that exposing children to pornography is not what we want to see happen. And I think that's part of the reason that industries have put in things like parental controls. Lots of apps and digital platforms have parental controls. Having a conversation with the other Senator Kavanaugh yesterday, talking about, this was off the mic, but about like when we were growing up, you had to like, everybody remember the AOL sound? They like dialing up. So, online access was very different when I was a teenager than teenagers now. And I wasn't tech savvy then, and I'm not tech savvy now. So I don't even know how they get around any of this stuff, but I know that they do. And that's kind of the great thing about young people is their creativity. But it is also an infuriating thing when you are trying to put up barriers for their protection. They are very creative about getting around those barriers. So if we're going to have young people, if they could figure it out in the 80s and the 90s with dial-up internet, they're figuring it out now, and it's much easier, I think, now. So I just want us to be cognizant of that before we enact policy that is, again, going to stigmatize and marginalize sex workers. And when we put sex workers on the fringe, we really do create an environment that is dangerous for them, and just creates a market for human trafficking. And I know that that is not the intention here, and I know that that's not what anyone here would like to see happen. So I have concerns over engaging in that possibility. And I would want to know I would want to have reassurances that that's not what has happened in other states where this is being implemented. I'd be interested to see and hear a little bit about
1 minute.
what other states have experienced after the implementation of this. I mean, I know Texas had the lawsuit, but that's one thing. That's a business concern. But what have other states experienced, and what have been the outcomes, and have they been positive? I'd like to know a little bit more about that before I would feel comfortable with supporting this. And I always have a little concern when we bring model legislation from other states, because every state is different and it might not work exactly how we want it to work. So I guess that's kind of where I'm at right now. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator Conrad announces some guests in the North Balcony, 4th and 5th graders from St. Patrick's Catholic School in Lincoln, Nebraska. Please stand and be recognized by your Nebraska Legislature. Returning to the queue, Senator Hunt, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, as we delve further into the debate on requiring age verification for accessing these websites, it's important, I think, for us to revisit a foundational principle of our democracy and our shared values. Not everything that we personally dislike or oppose should be translated into law. It just shouldn't. This is the principle that we know is vital in maintaining the delicate balance between our personal freedom and the regulation that we, all agree to live with in order to get along in society. But in a society that's as diverse as ours, that has such a variance in individual beliefs that we have, what one person considers objectionable, another person may see as perfectly acceptable. The essence of a free and open society is the right to agree to disagree and to navigate our differences with respect and tolerance. And I think that legislation that seeks to impose age restrictions on these types of websites, it ventures just a little bit too close to allowing personal moral judgments to dictate public policy. This not only risks infringing on individual freedoms, but it threatens the pluralistic fabric of our society. Moreover, legislating based on personal disapproval risks a slippery slope toward overregulation and censorship. Today, the target might be pornography. Mr. President, could I have a gavel? Legislating based on personal disapproval of something, it gets into censorship. Today, it might be pornography, which is viewed by some people as offensive or harmful. Tomorrow, the scope could expand to other forms of media, literature, anything that certain groups find offensive. And indeed, we've heard bills like that this year already, banning books in schools. I wonder if proponents of this bill would agree that we need age verification to look at Nebraska Public Media. I think according to the things that we've heard in the debate, the answer would be yes. I mean, the kids are out of the room now, but how many of you are comfortable having this conversation with them here? We're talking about adult issues that are serious, that have impact on our society for sure, and consequences of safety for kids, but this is the problem of introducing bills like this in the legislature, where we are veering too close into overregulation, into censorship. For what? For some of our colleagues to take a prurient interest in it and get off on it, frankly. It's also crucial for us to consider the practical implications of this legislation. By focusing on making certain content more difficult to access, what we're doing is we're inadvertently driving it underground. We're making it harder for law enforcement to track it and manage it. And this doesn't eliminate the content at all. As the bill introducer, Senator Merman, agrees, it just obscures it. Potentially, it could make it even more accessible to people who are seeking it out, including minors, including kids. I have always said I think a better and more responsible approach would be to invest in comprehensive education on digital literacy, responsible internet use, and empowering individuals and families and parents and teachers who we trust to make informed choices rather than restricting their access through legislation. I think the market is already coming up with solutions to this. I think parents and teachers, thank you, Mr. President, are already managing this in their own classrooms and homes and families. The argument against this, against age verification for pornography websites, I'm not endorsing, obviously, unrestricted access to this content by minors. What I'm doing is I'm acknowledging that the responsibility for this protection is not in overarching legislation that also infringes on adult freedoms, that also infringes on privacy and free speech. But the responsibility lies in open dialogue, in targeted education, and fostering responsible digital citizenship. And it's about preserving the freedom of adults to access legal content without undue government intrusion, while also promoting safe and responsible internet use through education and empowerment. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Hunt. Senator John Kavanaugh, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. One thing I did want to make sure I touch back on was I did talk with Senator Merman and staff about, we are on 2585. So on 2585, page 2, line 18, financial document or other document is a reliable proxy for age. And Senator Blood did touch on this as well. Sounds like that's credit cards have some information in them that when somebody puts it into the website, that it proves that at least the credit card holder is whatever age they are. And so that acts as the verification. So somebody 16 couldn't use a credit card, although can you get a credit card when you're 16? I guess you could probably get a debit card at least, get a bank account before you're 18. But anyway, I think that's what that part is intended to. So I appreciate Senator Merman and staff answering that question for me. Maybe it needs to be clearer in the writing, but that raises more of these sort of questions about asking people to give up a lot more of their information for, as Senator Hunt was saying, there's something people have a right to do. So there's a lot more information out there on the internet, a lot more information is captured. There's these, computers. I'm not a good person to talk about computers, is really what we're learning in this conversation, but that there's, computers capture all kinds of data. I think the cookies and things like that, where they can tell you go to one website and, you're searching certain type of shoes, and then it starts popping up as ads on the side while you're, reading the World Herald online. There'll be ads for whatever shoes you were looking at. Because the computers track all of that kind of stuff, and they build this sort of profile of you to know that that's what you'll be looking for. And, sometimes it feels like you have a thought. You're like, I'm thinking about buying some new shoes. And then you open up your computer and it's advertising shoes to you, and you think, why? What's going on there? How does it know what I'm thinking before I think it? Is it listening to me? So I think this is just more of the concerns that Senator Blood has been raising, which is that there's digital footprints, digital privacy, more information that we're requiring people to put out there creates more risks, which is dangerous going forward. But I did want to, before I run out of time, to go to another part of AM 2585 and just flag this for folks going forward. And maybe I'm wrong, but so 2585, page 1, line 13 through 14, distribute means to issue, sell, give, provide, deliver, transfer, transmute, circulate, or disseminate by any means. I think that transmute is the wrong word there. I think it probably needs to be transmit. So that's on line 14 for anybody who maybe is proposing an amendment going forward, because transmute would mean like to change in essence or nature or substance. And I don't know if we are wanting to regulate somebody changing the material we're talking about. I think we're talking about just the distribution of it or the transmission of it. So that might be a, Scrivener's error, as they would say, but it would be a very interesting requirement, I guess, to regulate the transmutation of this material. So if there is a forthcoming amendment at some point, that might be something that folks would want to take a look at. Again, it's page 1 of 2585, line 14. It's the second
1 minute.
word. Thank you, Mr. President. Transmute, probably should be transmit. But again, this is why you play the game, right? Why we have these conversations and have people kind of go through these things. There are issues. If we leave that in there, if that change doesn't get made, somebody will come back and look at the statute in years to come and say, what were they thinking? Why were they telling people they needed to transmute, this material? So that's some free advice for the folks working on the next draft of an amendment on this bill. Do I have any more times left, or was that my third time?
This is your last opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator Frederickson, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will yield my time to Senator Blood should you wish.
Senator Blood, you have 4 minutes, 55 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. President. Fellow senators, friends all, gosh, where did everybody go? Is there a press conference I don't know about? I can count on both hands how many people are in here. I keep going through the bills trying to find what I like and what I'm concerned about. I'm still not finding a lot that I like, but I found another thing that I'm concerned about. So if you look on page 3, lines 4 through 7, I don't feel that news organizations are well defined. In fact, I think you're really setting yourself up with some legal issues, because arguably you could have informational websites about sexy things, whatever you consider sexy, or it could be something about safe sex, or regarding things like children and pornography and why it's bad. Based on this definition, I think it's very vague. Now, I'm not a well-paid attorney, but I'm also not an idiot. I think we can look at that and realize that that is written in a way that is not defined well. And we did talk about that again yesterday, but again, I kind of feel like on this issue I've been talking into a void. Senator Kauth had asked me to read her bill yesterday, and I was happy to do that. And we had that fun discussion about chips in your hand. And I remind everybody that we talked about that in our weekly reader decades ago, but they lied to us and said we were going to have moving sidewalks and hover cars. So I don't believe a whole lot of what they say anymore. And I was very disappointed, by the way, because I love technology even when I was young. And airports don't count, by the way. But in her bill, her age of consent is 19. Again, if we had things in place with an IT committee and we had a committee looking at these bills, we could have better continuity. We don't have that this year. We still haven't gotten answers on many of the questions that I have asked. Who enforces this? There's no state agency designated to monitor any of this, not the Attorney General, not DHHS, just some random person can go ahead and sue if they think there's been a violation. And I cannot stress enough how many times our technology has been violated in Nebraska at the government level. Taxpayers, be it federal taxes or state taxes, doesn't matter. It's still your tax money. We got ripped off. We got ripped off by Nigerian crime rings, by Russian mafia. And when we had interim studies on it, public hearings, you know what we got? Well, it happens in other states. Well, who cares? I don't care what happens in other states, just like I don't care about this bad legislation that keeps popping up that we get from other states and organizations like ALEC. You are welcome to support those organizations, But these are creating a foundation for something worse. And we're all smart enough to know what that is. I choose to live in the United States because I have freedom of expression and freedom of thought. I have the ability to say what I want to say, whether you like it or not. And you do too. I hate the phrase, let's agree to
1 minute.
disagree, because I think that's the chicken way out. But I don't have to force my opinion down your throat and vice versa. And right now, that's kind of what we're doing with some of this nanny legislation. We're forcing our opinions down the throats of people, thinking we're doing something for the greater good. And instead, we are violating people's rights, opening up the gates to make things worse, and possibly allowing people to have commit crimes against people that are doing what they have the legal right to do. And don't say, well, this goes on in other incidents. It doesn't matter. Credit card companies now are way ahead of things like the porn sites. They are self-policing because they lose money on it. We've got to do better. You can do better. Senator Merman's a decent guy. He's trying to do something right, but this bill is going to hurt people. And when you vote yes, you're responsible. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Blood. Senator Vargas would like to announce a guest under the north balcony, his wife, Lauren Misek Vargas. Please stand and be recognized by your Nebraska Legislature. Returning to the queue, Senator DeBoer, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I yield my time to Senator Blood if she would like it.
Senator Blood, that'd be 4 minutes, 55 seconds.
Thank you, Senator DeBoer. Friends, fellow senators, I said that backwards, but you're still my friends. I still stand opposed to the underlying bill and the amendments because they address a word or two I said, but are taken out of context and don't address the entire issue. In order for us to have sound policy, we need a framework put into place when it comes to technology. That framework is not in place. You don't pass a bill that's not ready for prime time and then try and follow up with it a year later to fix it. Not knowingly. Now, we can go back to the original safe haven law, right? This body passed a bill, we weren't in it, that they didn't really define correctly what the Safe Haven Act was about, and we had people bringing teenagers into our state to abandon them because the parents couldn't handle the teenagers anymore. And we had to come back, I think, to a special session to fix that. That's what we're doing now. But the difference is you're doing this knowingly. I respect that Senator Arch came to talk to me, that we would like to get on to the other more important bills. Excuse me, I didn't mean that any bill was more important than yours, Senator Merman. But other bills that people would like to get back to. I'll rephrase that because I don't want to hurt feelings. But you know, if I go someplace and someone hits me in the face with a baseball bat, and I know that every time I go to that place, I'm going to get hit in the face with a baseball bat, I'm probably not going to keep going back there. This is a baseball bat. Why do we want to keep going there to get hit in the face again? I don't. Because I'm smart enough to understand that a badly written bill, no matter what the topic, is a badly written bill. And I'm not saying that they did that on purpose. When you duplicate things in mass production, it is not a one-size-fits-all policy for every state. We have a one-house system. We are the only state in the United States that has a one-house system. We are different than other states. Our legislation goes through sometimes much faster. And when it's the special interest topics, sometimes too fast. You can fix this bill and bring it back. And that's what you can go home and tell your constituents. We want to fix it. We want to make it stronger. We want to make sure it works. And then when they send the nasty emails, like I heard this one out about the baby box bill, who's somebody who likes to twist the truth. You can say, I know better because I believe in the F word. I believe in facts. I believe in science. I believe in data. There has not been a single thing handed to you with science, facts, and data in reference to this bill that shows that anything that I have said is untrue. But I have shared data with you. I shared the VPN article in reference to Texas that showed that they had a huge burst in people utilizing VPN to get around the bill that they put in place in Texas. How many of those do you think were kids? Because if you were listening last night, I had a constituent that Googled it, 30 pages on how to utilize free VPN. Seems like that's not very hard. You know, I don't know what kids do in grade school now, but my kids were writing code in grade school. That was before things became easier. But back then you had to write code to do anything, right? And you had those matrix printers, remember those? Times have changed. Now you have a more powerful computer in your smartphone. We were always told as kids that computers would get bigger, and they got smaller and more accessible and easier to use. Even a grade schooler can use it. I don't know what's going to happen. I have a good idea. And I hate that by you guys moving this forward because you think you can make it a better bill because you can't. You realize that we're going to have to do this all over again. And I don't want to do that. The few times I've stood up on things like this, I've asked the person to make it better, and I've been honest, if you can't make it better, you can't make it better. This falls on our shoulders. Be brave, do what's right. Senator Merman will rise again. He has other bills that will get passed. We win some, we lose some. But gosh, I'm not going to be able to live with myself if we pass bad legislation like this, because then I have to go home and say, yes, they voted this through.
That's your time, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Blood. Senator Hunt, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. A guy I know in Utah, would Senator Merman yield to a question?
Senator Merman, would you yield to a question?
Yes.
They got this law in Utah. Do they have this there?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Senator Merman. So I know a guy in Utah, and I had him check Pornhub on his phone, and it worked with no problem because iPhones have this built-in VPN called Private Relay, and so he was able to just get right on it, and there was no problem at all. So even in states where they have this law, it's not even a matter of like, oh, you've got to be this like genius child hacker to get around this stuff. Like, you can just open your iPhone and go right to it in states that already have this law and nothing even happens. I don't think this is the solution that we're looking for. In discussing the proposed age verification for accessing pornography websites, it's so essential to just consider the widespread availability of VPNs, of virtual private networks, as a way to circumvent the law. It used to be that you had to download, and you still can, like you can download, and I guess it depends on what your device is, but on an iPhone or most Android phones, they have a built-in VPN, so you don't even need to download anything or have any software. And that's different for iPads and tablets and desktop computers. And at the risk of being accused of giving a how-to on how to get around these pornographic website restrictions that LB 1092 seeks to impose, my point is that you don't even have to knowingly try to get around it. If you have the VPN on your phone, it's not going to be blocked, period. I also think it's important to address the crucial consequence of driving this content further underground. We see this, Senator Brewer can tell you, when you ban guns, what happens to the gun market? It goes underground and it becomes less safe. What happens when you have prohibitions on drugs? They go underground and become less safe. And then we have problems with opioid overdoses and abuse and fentanyl abuse. And I am of the mindset that smart regulation of these products would actually be safer for public safety and would keep kids safer. And the same applies to the internet. When we impose stringent controls over internet content, such as mandatory age verification, we don't eliminate the demand for that content. We just push it into less regulated, harder to monitor corners of the digital world. The internet is vast, it's anonymous, There are parts of the internet that y'all have never even heard of or known about. And kids know what this is. Young people know what this is. And as we shift this content underground, it just makes people who are determined to find it look elsewhere. And I also, I understand Senator Merman's answer to my question about, does this put any liability or does this criminalize at all the people who are doing this, the adults and possibly minors who are knowingly, intentionally, deliberately using VPNs, using other websites that don't require age verification, doing other means of accessing explicit materials. If this bill doesn't criminalize them, does this perhaps start us down a path of a future of that?
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think that many of you would attest that the allure of the forbidden is something that's a very powerful motivator. That's why you hear many Christian men say things like, I can't have dinner with a woman without my wife there, like Mike Pence says. I can't have a meeting with a woman alone without my wife there, or some other adult men. You see examples of this all over our political culture, of people having so much trouble controlling their impulses. And the solution to that is not these far-reaching overregulation, infringement of rights, heavy hand of government coming down to just ban it for everybody. It's equipping individuals, particularly our youth, with the knowledge and tools to navigate the digital world responsibly, to understand consent and autonomy, to have the confidence and self-assurance to know what's right for them. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Hunt. Senator Dungan, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. I've not had a chance to speak much about this bill here today. I know we had a conversation about it yesterday that I thought was actually very illuminating and helped me understand a little bit more about the bill. But I do think it's important to keep talking about it today. And I want to be very clear to people listening either at home or in the chamber. This is not just wasting time. There was a little bit of time yesterday, for example, we were waiting for an amendment, I think on one of Senator Wayne's bills, where you heard people getting up and talking about their district and talking about sort of the things that are in their district. I think I read a recitation of the history of Colonel E.H. Taylor. That is stretching for time. And we do that at certain points, and when we're trying to do something behind the scenes, get an amendment drafted or get something else done, or you're waiting for somebody to get here. This is a substantive conversation. And I think that Senator Blood has done a fantastic job of outlining both the importance of addressing the underlying issue that Senator Merman is talking about here and that many of us share a concern about, which is protecting the youth of Nebraska from seeing things that could harm them, but still balancing that concern with both a number of logistical issues that lie in LB 1092 with regards to how this process works, and also potential policy issues and legal issues when you get into the actual effect of this bill. Before I came up here, I was actually downstairs talking to a group of high schoolers here from Lincoln who were up in the balcony who were watching part of this conversation. And one of them asked me a really good question. And they said, when you're looking at a bill, how do you determine what you're going to vote on it or how you're going to vote on it? And I thought that was a really good question because it's not something we talk about very much. What I said to him is essentially three things. And I was kind of coming up with these as I was processing in my head. And I realized it's actually a pretty good outline of how I think I analyze bills. One of them is, who does this help? Who does this bill actually affect? And what is the ill that we're trying to fix here? And in looking at LB 1092, I understand what we're trying to do and who we're trying to help. And so I understand the intent. And I think, again, to reiterate, Senator Merman is very genuine in his concerns here, and I appreciate the fact we've been able to talk about that. The second thing that I consider that I think we should look at is, what are the unintended consequences? Just because a bill has a good concept and just because a bill has a good catalyst for why we're doing it does not mean it doesn't have unintended consequences down the road. There are plenty of ideas that we have in this legislature that are great, that if we brought and effectuated in their current language would be a disaster logistically for this state. I've had some of them too. I've had ideas where I, kick it around during the interim. Oh, what if we do X, Y, and Z? And then down the road, I think, oh no, we can't do that because something, this unintended consequence will happen. And that's the step on 1092 that I think Senator Blood and others have done a really, really good job of saying, I'm not fighting against the content of what we're trying to do. I'm fighting against, or I'm questioning what the consequences of enacting this bill will be. One of those obviously is the litigation that we are going to find ourselves embroiled in. We've seen it in other states. We've seen it in Louisiana. We've seen it in Arkansas. We've seen it in all these other jurisdictions who have done things to enact these online age verifications. And yes, as we talked about yesterday, we've seen a split in the courts, right? We've seen a split in the way that people have ruled. But generally speaking, the courts have consistently held that restricting access to material implicates free speech. And one of the things that I certainly don't want to do in enacting legislation is invite litigation, right? The state of Nebraska already has enough going on. I don't think we need to invite litigation on legislation that we know from looking at the history of other states and looking at our sister states nearby is going to get us involved in a court case.
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. In addition to that, there are other concerns that I have with regards to the third-party companies that we consistently talk about and whether or not those third-party companies are going to gather our information and what they're going to do with that. So those are the unintended consequences down the line that I think we have to analyze. The third step that I think we should look at in looking at legislation is the long-standing or the out years cost. And is this fiscally responsible or not? On this analysis, I think I can stop on step 2 and say that I have enough concerns to at least have pause about what this is or is not going to do. But I think in analyzing any legislation, those are kind of the 3 steps we have to look at. And certainly when you get to step 2 on LB 1092, there are unintended consequences that I think could happen. I think this bill is not ready for prime time based on the analysis that I've heard and what I've read. And my hope is we can continue to work together on achieving the goals of protecting Nebraskans everywhere, but do so in a way that logistically works. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Dungan. Senator Vargas, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you very, very much. In a second, I'll yield my time. I'll just reiterate, this passed, specifically been looking at the way it was passed in Virginia. I look forward to what further gets implemented on this bill to make sure that it actually is operational. I understand the intent, and more importantly, I think for the legislative record, I think it's important we're having the debate and support doing that. And so I'll yield the remainder of my time to Senator Blood, if she would like it.
Thank you, Senator Vargas. Senator Blood, you have 4 minutes, 25 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Senator Vargas. Friends, I'm still sitting here listening to debate, and I know that Senator Merman's staff is here, and I haven't seen him take a lot of notes on some of the things I said, so I don't have high hopes that you're going to amend things for the better, but we'll see. But I want to piggyback onto what Senator Dungan just said. Friends, when we support a concept without looking at the actual text of the law or text of the bill, you're really subjectively imagining what you want to ban without actually seeing whether the letter of the law does it already, or if it's a good fit for state statute, or if it does what you really want it to do. And that's a problem. And that's how we get bad legislation. That's how we got the original safe haven bill was all screwed up. We were so desperate to do it. I go back to the abortion bill that pertained to IVF. And it was a very short bill with text on it. And it was a pretty intense debate based on one small paragraph. But for me, the first sentence of the bill was very clear, and it was that the bill, as written, prevented anybody from having IVF. And I warned us about that bill, and there were 2 people that were originally supporting that bill, and the bill ended up being filibustered and did not pass. Now, I never came back and said, I told you so, that it was problematic, and there'll be all kinds of problems in the future, and we need to pull this out. And I said, this is problematic. It needs to go. You shouldn't pass that bill because now you're punishing people that you say birth is precious. And by the way, I know for the Catholics, there are Catholics who don't believe in IVF, and I don't fault you for that. But for the people who utilize IVF and wouldn't have a family without it, we were now punishing them. And I would like to point out that at the time, it was the same conversation. Well, other states are doing it. And now what's happening to those other states that push bills like that through? Well, look at Alabama, friends. You got to read the bills. You got to read the text of the bills. And you have to understand what it means. Because if you are only worried about the causation, about how it's going to look to the public, how you believe it's going to work, as opposed to how it will really work, that's not what we're here to do. We can stand up and talk about how we hate certain things all the time, and that's why we support bills or don't support bills. But none of that matters if the text doesn't support the cause, if the text doesn't support what you want to do and how you want to do it. And we could drag this out longer. Or we could say, let's fix it between general and select. But friends, it can't be fixed. And I like you all a lot, but I'm sure you're sick of hearing me talk. But for those of you that listened, I bet you've learned a lot. Like maybe changing the standing committees for next year. Hopefully getting some young people in that understand technology to be on a technology committee, and maybe think about getting a security officer, because I'm not getting good responses when I talk about things like cybersecurity in the budget. I don't know what's going on in Nebraska, but I do know we've had sites that have failed us, that have been unsafe, that we have been screwed taxpayers over, but not having good security in place. We can do better. I hope we will do better. But let's see what happens. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Blood. Senator Dungan, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. And colleagues, I don't want to belabor the point. I know Senator Blood, I think, has made this point time and time again, but we really do, I think, need to be cautious in how we are legislating around this. When I read this bill, one of the concerns that comes to me is the definition section. I'm not going to delve into the entirety of the definition section, but I do find it interesting that what is called harmful material for children in here is sort of separately delineated from other statutes that we've utilized in the past to define things that are obscene. I think it is important to note that what we're doing here is we are differentiating these materials from what is traditionally referred to as obscene materials in the rest of the statutes. I think I understand why that is, but it's something that I was, I guess, a little bit confused about. And so I'd be curious where that definition section came from. It is a very clearly laid out section. And so I'm curious where we got all those those parts of the language and where that evolved from. So hopefully at some point somebody can speak to that. And I do apologize if that's already been explained. I know sometimes we're all coming in and out of the floor on a regular basis, but some explanation of where we got our definitions for the harmful material I think would be helpful. And then in addition to that, I have pause about this right to civil action that is being utilized in it. Certainly, I think that when we have enforcement mechanisms in bills, it is important to ensure the enforcement mechanism works and it actually has the effect of accountability. That's why we have enforcement. If you have a law on the books but no enforcement in any capacity, then what's the point, right? I do agree, generally speaking, that civil enforcement tends to be the best way to go about these things, given the fact that I don't think we need to over-criminalize a lot of other things, and there's already enough criminal statutes on the books to handle most situations we find ourselves in. But I will note that the majority of bills, at least that I've brought and that I've seen with regards to enforcement mechanisms on the civil side of things, it allows the Attorney General to then bring the suit. Upon notification or upon violation of the section, the Attorney General's office can then initiate the civil suit. That is very different than a member of the public or a citizen being given the right to sue upon the violation. Certainly, we've seen other laws around the country where this has been, I think, a trend that has been increasing over time, which is giving individuals the civil right of action if they violate some sort of quasi-criminal sounding law. We've seen it in Texas surrounding abortions. We've seen it, I think, in other states as well. And it is an issue that I think I understand why it exists, but it is certainly a concern that I have because I don't want to see an exponential increase in these sort of frivolous litigations happening. Now, I'm not saying everybody's going to just come out and bring suit, but if we as a body start using this kind of legislation on a regular basis and increasing the amount of civil actions permissible for violations of subsections of laws, I think it could potentially have a negative effect on our court system. I think it could potentially have a negative effect on our state, and certainly, if we increase the ability of individual citizens to sue others for violating certain provisions, it's going to have a chilling effect on certain kinds of behaviors and actions. And that's the intent. That is the intent, is not even necessarily the cases being brought in places like Texas or other areas. It's the fear that a case could be brought. And that is exactly the intention behind increasing these rights to civil action. So when I read that part of the bill, it struck me, not even necessarily as
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President, the wrong way to do this, but it struck me as a potentially problematic step in a direction where we're going to start seeing more and more of that legislation introduced in Nebraska. And colleagues, one of the things that makes Nebraska special is that we are oftentimes, not all the time, but oftentimes immune to some of the ridiculousness that we see in other states. And I really want to keep this state special in that sense. And I want to ensure that we maintain our independence, that we maintain our thoughtful approach to legislation, and that we avoid the nonsense that we see in the hyper-partisan world of other states and certainly in Washington, D.C. So colleagues, please be thoughtful in considering both the AM and the LB, and I appreciate the conversation we've had here today. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Dungan. Senator Wayne, you're recognized to close on AM 2585. Senator Bohr, the Vice Chair, you're recognized to close on the committee amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Judiciary Committee amendment makes a couple of changes to the green copy, as Senator Wayne indicated at the beginning of this debate, including changing the definition of obscenity to match other parts of our statutes. And I think it changes the cause of action in some way, but I can't remember what. But that's the committee amendment. It's basically the green copy bill with those two changes. Sorry, I don't have more information about that at this time. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator DeBoer. Members, the question is the adoption of AM 2585. All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Has everyone voted who wishes to? Record, Mr. Clerk.
34 ayes, 1 nay on the adoption of the committee amendment, Mr. President.
AM 2585 is adopted. Continuing discussion on the bill, Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. So I did vote for the amendment. I think I voted for the last amendment as well because I think that they do improve upon LB 1092. But I am going to remain present, not voting on the bill to move forward because I am not convinced that this is the right avenue for what we are trying to accomplish here. Some of the things that Senator Blood has highlighted last night and again today is the lack of an adequate description of material harmful to minors. There's also concern over regulations on commercial entities regarding the publication, distribution of materials deemed harmful to minors on the internet. This isn't going to stop children from accessing porn. It's going to stop them and potentially others from accessing it in a specific way. So, I just question whether or not that's really appropriate. Kids are creative and they certainly can outfox us in the digital realm. So I do think that this is probably a good first attempt at addressing this, but I would personally like to see this worked on, perhaps even an interim study to look at the technical side of things. And I am curious how this is working in other states that have implemented it. I know, some states have lost porn companies, and maybe that's fine. Maybe that's the intention. I do believe that is a revenue stream, however, for the state. We do tax purchases, and so any adults seeking that content would be paying for that content, and there would be a tax assessed to it. And I wonder what the financial implications would be of this if states or if these companies were to leave the state, no longer operate in the state. Maybe it's negligible, maybe it's not negligible, but we're okay with that. But those are things that I think should be thought about and talked through. And so I just don't feel that this is quite where it should be. It's a more complicated issue than just should we prohibit children from having access to porn? Because yes, adult content is not appropriate for children. Yes. But how we do that needs to be thoughtful and, not a sort of a nanny state over-regulation, over-burdensome for businesses. And so trying to balance those things is important. And I just don't feel that we've quite struck that balance yet with this bill.
1 minute.
I do think that there's potential for it, but I think it needs more consideration by people who are smarter on digital propriety than me and legal aspects. And we should perhaps be looking to bring those people into the state or convene them to talk about how this should work. Model legislation is model. And so that is hard to implement state by state. And we have different rules than Texas. I don't know what ultimately led to companies leaving Texas. They say it was the age verification. I don't know what about that was problematic. So I'd like to learn more about that as well. And I think I'm about out of time. So thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator John Kavanaugh, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. So, colleagues, I was talking a little bit about, some of my questions about the choices in the bill, and I referenced AM 2585, which we just adopted, which is now the bill, has on page 2 and lines 14 through 21, kind of says what options are available for age verification. And I did print off and looked at the bill from Kansas that Senator Merman referenced. And I would just say in their definition of reasonable methods of age verification include government ID or any commercially reasonable method that relies on public or private transactional data to verify the age of a person attempting to access the information. So theirs is maybe a little less defined, but it doesn't have this other financial document part that I was a little confused about, which I think we're told is intended to be credit cards. So I don't know which one would be better, but I just think that that's a distinction. But that led me to continue reading the Kansas law, and they have it's Kansas law, which nobody's holding in front of them, but if you do happen to look at it, it's HB 2301, page 2, line 17. They have a definition of distribute. Means to issue, sell, give, provide, deliver, transfer, transmute, circulate, or disseminate by any means, which brings me back to my original one I talked about earlier, is our page 1 of AM 2585 says distribute means to issue, sell, give, provide, deliver, transfer, transmute, circulate, or disseminate by any means. So I pointed that out as what I thought was maybe a Scrivener's error, and maybe it still is. Maybe it's one that's in both the Kansas law and our law, because I looked up transmute again to make sure I was right about it. And transmute means to change in nature or essence, which, this being Holy Week, I could make the reference to transubstantiation for my Catholic friends. I know Senator Brandt is not Catholic, so Lutheran. I don't believe you guys believe in transubstantiation. But transubstantiation would be where during the Mass, the priest does the rite and the host and wine is transformed in essence and substance into the body and blood of Christ. So that is a form of, that's transubstantiation, I think because of the form and essence. But transmutation, as I always think about alchemy, which is, when I think of alchemy, I think of the Smurfs. I'm sure many people here are familiar with the Smurfs. It's I think Hanna-Barbera cartoon, maybe not, but it's an old cartoon about small blue people, and they all have personalities that are characterized in their name. Like a guy who's very sleepy is Sleepy Smurf, and there's Grumpy, and there's Handy, and things like that. So they all have these personalities. But there's this guy called Gargamel, who is kind of the antagonist. And he is always trying to capture the Smurfs. And if you might not remember this, but it always stuck with me. The reason Gargamel wants to capture the Smurfs is because he's a wizard and he is attempting to achieve alchemy. And alchemy is where lead is transmuted into gold. So that's what transmute means. And so one of the essential elements to this transmutation for the wizard Gargamel is Smurfs. They are a part of this magical process that he needs to engage in. So that is what I think of when I see the word transmute. I don't understand it as another word for distribute. And so it's possible it's a typo in both the Kansas law, and then maybe we did base ours, which we do a lot. Everybody peek behind the curtains. We take laws from other states and we make them fit into our statutes, and sometimes you miss. If there's a typo in that one, it might be a typo in this one, and that's entirely possible. I don't know if this was the basis, or maybe it's the original bill in Texas somewhere had transmute as a typo. I just don't know if there's another definition of transmute that would cover distribute and not turning Smurfs into gold. So again, I would suggest maybe we should consider amending that into transmit, and we could be the first state to pass this bill without the word transmute in it. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator Michaela Kavanaugh, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Wow, that was something. I thought I was really proud of myself with my Amelia Bedelia correlation yesterday, but Smurfs and gold, well, that's just gold right there. I missed some of that story because Senator DeVore was discussing with me consubstantiation, which is what Lutherans believe in, with, and under the bread. So I said it sounded kind of like a hipster thing that the Lutherans believe that the bread is infused. It's like a, cool infusion of Christ into the bread. And my husband is Lutheran, and I am a vegetarian, and he likes to oftentimes remind me that I am being a cannibal when I take communion. So that's sort of our little religious thing that we talk about, I guess. Yeah, Easter's coming up, Senator John Kavanaugh, and maybe the Easter Bunny will bring your kids some Smurfs. That would be, which actually reminds me, I hope the Easter Bunny has already got kites ready. That is a family tradition we have, is flying kites on Easter. I don't really know why that's our family tradition. I guess it's just because the Easter Bunny brings them, so we fly them, and they usually get destroyed, and that is why it's only once a year that we do it. And our brother Pete is infamous for getting any toy, new toy, Christmas, Easter, doesn't matter. If it's something that goes up into the air, our brother Pete gets it stuck in a tree. Every time. Every single time. Even now, when he's in his late 30s, he gets the toy stuck in the tree. So Pete always has to play with whatever the toy is last. He legitimately, even if it's for him, he doesn't get to play with whatever the toy is that goes up into the air until everybody else has had a turn, because we all know that will be the last time it is played with, because it will go up in the tree. It's kind of like that book Stuck. If any of you have ever read that, it's a little boy whose ball gets stuck up in the tree, and he just keeps lobbing things into the tree to get it unstuck, and he ends up lobbing a fire truck and a ladder and I think a house, and eventually the ball comes free and everything else is still stuck, including firefighters. He gets a fire truck and firefighters stuck in a tree. I have no idea how I got to that point, but at this point, I think we're just, gonna get to a vote on this before we break for lunch, and that was pretty much it. I actually was looking up the case in Texas, and it seems like there's some back and forth around it. There was an injunction on the implementation of this law in Texas, and then that was overturned. And actually, let me grab that. So the president of the brand company that owns this website says, unfortunately, the Texas law for age verification is ineffective, haphazard, and dangerous. Not only will it not actually protect children, it will inevitably reduce content creators' ability to post and distribute legal adult content and directly impact their ability to share the artistic messages they want to convey with it. And that is what I am concerned about, is marginalizing the adult content and the people who are participating in it to create then a less safe environment for the work. So I think we're about done. We're going to vote and have lunch. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Seeing no one else in the queue, Senator Merman, you're recognized to close.
Thank you, Mr. Lieutenant Governor. I just want to say the whole purpose of this bill is to help parents protect their kids. So it's not perfect. You know, there's always ways of getting around it, just like there is ways of kids getting around buying alcohol. But it at least will be helpful to parents to protect their kids. It was earlier referenced that there's been some lawsuits in some states that have passed this bill. There have been, but the main point is that the lawsuits have not been successful. A good example is, I think just a week ago, the Fifth Circuit in Texas, the lawsuit there, Texas was successful in the Fifth Circuit Appellate Court there. I am committed to continue to work on the bill to make it better, even better. By the way, I have worked with the Attorney General. It's not a half-baked bill. I've worked with the Attorney General. I've used model bills in pretty much all of the states that have passed the bill. And in working with the Attorney General here in Nebraska, I think we have a good bill, but we can always make it better, and I will do that going on to select file. And by the way, just as a side note, I will change transmute to transmit. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Merman. Members, the question is the advancement of LB 1092 to E&R initial. All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
"30 yeas, no nays on the advancement of the bill, Mr. President."
LB 1092 advances to E&R initial. Mr. Clerk, items for the record.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have a notice of committee hearing from the Health and Human Services Committee, a new resolution, legislative resolution 445, introduced by Senator Lowe. That will be laid over. That is all I have. Mr. President, Senator Holdcroft would move to recess the body until 1:30 p.m.
Members, you've heard the motion to recess. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, nay. We are in recess.